February 19th, 1978, Holland, Michigan. A local college student by the name of Steven Kubacki would decide to head out on a solo cross-country skiing trip along the southeastern shore of Lake Michigan. What was supposed to be only a day trip would be anything but. When Steven Kubacki headed out on that winter's day, he wouldn't return. What was found was his backpack and skis left abandoned, and a trail of footprints that seemingly stopped going out onto the ice of Lake Michigan. What happened next would perplex investigators and leave them with more questions than answers. On May 5th, 1979, Kubacki would wake up in a field in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, over 700 miles away from where he first vanished. Is the case of Steven Kubacki proof that he somehow got sucked into a time vortex? Is his disappearance further evidence of the Lake Michigan Triangle? Or is there some more grounded explanation to the most fascinating missing persons case you've probably never heard of? Today on Unblurring the Unknown, the curious and equally mysterious case of Steven Kubacki. Welcome back to Unblurring the Unknown. As always, I am your host, Dominic, and this week's topic is one that I've done a little bit of prior research on, and I got a little spark to look into it a little bit more and, cover it as a topic for this week. Now, on the surface, you might be like, Dominic, why are we doing another missing persons episode? We just did one over Maura Murray a couple weeks ago. Why are we doing another missing persons episode? And the reason for that is because this, in a sense, isn't a missing persons case, but rather the disappearance and then mysterious reappearance. So I guess it could fall into that, but it's a little bit more intriguing and a little bit more mysterious because of the duration of time that elapsed between when Steven Kubacki first disappeared to when he reappeared. And what's equally as fascinating about this case is the lack of information and media that is out there on the internet in regards to this case. I think if there was more information about it, obviously more people would have heard about it, and they'd have a better scope of this whole incident and as a whole. And the fact that it is not well known is, again, part of the reason why I wanted to cover it for this week's episode. Now, with that being said, obviously, kind of the close proximity of the missing people episodes, if you want me to cover more conspiracies, aliens, cryptids, or anything else in between, just let me know, and I am more than willing to accommodate with my episode queue as much as I can. With that being said, how today's episode is going to go is that I'm going to give you a little background on Steven Kubacki and his life, and then we're going to go into his disappearance and reappearance, and then kind of wrap everything up at the end with some other facts I dug up, and then also go into theories and, kind of tie up some loose ends here and there while we go through it as well. Now, before we get into what happened the day Steven Kubacki disappeared out on the ice in Lake Michigan, let's get into a little bit about Steven before we dive into that. Steven was originally from South Deerfield, Massachusetts. Steven was a good student and participated in numerous sports like cross-country skiing and rock climbing. He was accepted and enrolled at the Deerfield Academy Prep School, where he earned a scholarship to. Steven had quite the intellect, and this intellect brought him to go to Hope College in Holland, Michigan. And this was after he graduated from Deerfield Academy. While at Hope College, Steven's professors spoke very highly of him, as he was extremely smart and obviously a very good student. Other students, however, thought Steven as a little bit nerdy, or even some saying that he was a bit weird. Steven was attending Hope College with the goal to get a history degree with a minor in the German language. While at Hope College, he decided to take some time and study abroad in Germany for 18 months. While studying abroad, he also taught English at the University of Freiburg. Rumor is that Steven had met a girl while studying in Germany, and they developed a romance together. When Steven's time in Germany came to a close and he had to return to Hope College, his girlfriend had to stay in Germany. In 1978, when Steven returned to Hope College, he had only 9 credits left, which is like 3 classes or so until he graduated from Hope College. And he actually had a job lined up for when he graduated later that year, working for a newspaper. On February 19th, 1978, so this is the disappearance. Obviously, I gave you that little bit of background. And obviously, that background was very short. And that's mostly because there's not a lot of information about this. So there'll be periods in this episode that'll go through here. And you're like, well, Dom, that's not normally your usual deep dive of information into a certain thing. And that's because there isn't a lot of information on this. So I found as much as I possibly could in terms of this case this week, and I just want you all to know that. But let's get back to the story. On February 19th, 1978, Steven decided to take a cross-country skiing trip from Hope College and down to the shores of Lake Michigan, which was approximately a 6-mile trip. Now, there was plenty of snow on the ground, as in the month prior, in January of 1978, the area was hit by a massive snowstorm, which left numerous feet of snow on the ground in some places. His roommates didn't think much of him going off on this cross-country skiing trip, because this was something that he did quite frequently. Lake Michigan was mostly frozen over, so this helped Steven out as well, as he would frequently walk out onto the ice on the lake as well. Now, this would be the same day Steven would go missing, and what day his belongings would be found varies from source to source, but what I do know is that his belongings were either found on February 20th or the 21st. From everything that I've found, more sources say the 20th, so in the sake of the story, I'm going to say it was found the following day, the 20th. Now, his belongings were found by a group of snowmobilers who were going through the area, and they saw a pair of cross-country ski poles that were standing upright like they were placed there, and a backpack resting on top of his cross-country skis, almost like somebody had taken their skis off, set the backpack on top of the skis, and then dug the ski poles into the ground next to the skis. Like, it was very deliberate. It wasn't just like dropped there in a rush. Everything was placed there deliberately. I just want you to keep that in mind. Now, upon further investigation, they also noticed a set of footprints going from the skis about 300 yards out onto the ice of Lake Michigan, but no set of tracks heading back. These snowmobilers followed the prints out onto the ice quite a ways, but stopped after a certain distance, as the ice gets thinner farther out, and they did not want to risk falling through. However, they were very perplexed by this, and called it into local police departments, thinking that someone might have fallen through the ice. Now, Steven's roommate had filed a missing persons report the night prior, after Steven didn't return home, and when the snowmobilers called in the report of the skis and the gear that was left behind, investigators had a very strong suspicion that this was Steven's belongings. Now, authorities launched an investigation, and Steven's parents were notified, and they made the trek from Massachusetts to Michigan to help look for their son. Authorities were convinced that Steven most likely fell through the ice at some point, as it wasn't fully solid, the ice wasn't fully safe. Obviously, that's the risk you take when you go out onto any frozen body of water, that no ice is safe ice. So investigators came to the conclusion that he most likely fell through the ice. However, Steven's dad, John Kubacki Sr., didn't think Steven fell through the ice just because of Steven's experience with the outdoors. He would think that he would know when the ice would be safe to go out on and when it wasn't. Steven's brother, John Jr., thought it was strange that Steven would remove his backpack, as Steven would often keep items such as his compass and other belongings in the backpack to help prevent him from getting lost. On February 22nd, with no new leads, the police were going to call off the search. Steven's parents insisted that they kept going, but unfortunately with nothing to go off of, and authorities thinking he fell through the ice, investigators and police sidelined the case until the spring when the ice melted. When it did, nothing still turned up. No body was found, and the police at this point were truly stumped. They were so stumped, in fact, that they decided to send Steven's dental records to the Chicago police. You might be asking yourself, why would they send Steven's dental records to the Chicago police? Because there was reasonable suspicion. They thought that maybe Steven was one of the unidentified victims of serial killer John Wayne Gacy. Now, that's how truly stumped they were. They had no leads. They're like, maybe he's one of these unidentified bodies of serial killer John Wayne Gacy, as he was discovered, I guess, if that's the right word, within a similar time frame as this. So they were really stumped. They had no leads to go off of. They thought for sure he fell through. They thought for sure a body would turn up. Come springtime, none of that happened. Again, it was a true head scratcher for the police, for all the investigators that were looking into Steven's case. Now, presuming he was dead, Hope College awarded Steven with his degree in absentia, which basically means like in memoriam. Like, you passed away before your degree was done. We're going to award you that degree in absentia, like, all right, in honor of, you're getting it because you passed away. That's the reason why you're getting the degree. Now, this is where the case takes a very odd turn, and that being 14 months later, on May 5th, 1979, Steven would, quote-unquote, wake up in a grassy field. Steven had no idea where he was. Steven had a backpack on he did not recognize, with clean clothes inside of it. He was wearing a t-shirt from a marathon in Wisconsin. He had $40 in cash, eyeglasses that he did not recognize, and also maps and hitchhiking signs as well. Steven kind of fully came to, and he didn't know where he was. He also didn't realize how much time had passed until he found a newspaper and realized that he was in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, which is over 700 miles away. Steven was confused about the whole ordeal, but was worried about going straight home to his parents, as they most certainly would be sent into a panic frenzy as to why their son, who they thought was dead, magically showed up on their doorstep. So instead of doing that, Steven decided to go to his aunt's house in the nearby town of Great Barrington, Massachusetts. Now, obviously, it took Steven a little bit to get his bearings after he woke up in the field, but once he realized where he was, he knew that South Deerfield wasn't too far away. And obviously, like I previously mentioned, thought that it was not the best if he went and saw his parents right away. So this is when he decided to go to his aunt's house as well, and then have his aunt call his parents from there. Now, when Steven showed up to Great Barrington, and the news about his reappearance hit the press, and they were all over it. But before that, Steven hitchhiked most of his way to his aunt's house. And once he found his aunt there, she was stunned, because she also thought he was missing, that he was dead, that something happened. Steven should not be standing in front of her right now and at this instant. Now, she got on the phone to Steven's parents, and before long, they raced over, and they were reunited. And what remains unanswered is really what happened in those 14 months. Where was Steven? And what had happened? Why was he, for lack of a better term, AWOL for 14 months? Where did he go? How did he get there? How did he get from Holland, Michigan to Pittsfield, Massachusetts? It just didn't make any sense. Now, like I previously mentioned, reporters had a field day with this. The young man who seemingly disappeared on the ice in Lake Michigan and then magically reappears in Massachusetts. It's a story that would eat up any type of headlines if you published it today. Now, Steven would go on to tell the reporters that he felt like he did a lot of running, and that's a quote, while he was blacked out, like during this 14-month period where he just doesn't remember. Now, while he was blacked out, he can only recall bits and pieces of what he can remember. Now, he said that he only remembered up to the point of him standing out on the ice of Lake Michigan. He said that all he remembered was being cold and scared, and also the feeling of being lost. He told a reporter that he felt like him blacking out was due to exposure to the elements, and Steven did tell reporters that he was going to go get checked out by a doctor, but not a psychiatrist. He felt like he was in a perfectly healthy state of mind at the time of his disappearance, and didn't feel like he needed a mental checkup at all. Steven's roommate would confirm this as well. When his roommate was questioned, he said, yeah, he seems totally fine, doesn't seem to be having any mental lapses of any sort, checks all the boxes for me. And investigators like, okay. So that kind of reassured Steven as well, like, all right, no, I don't got to take a mental eval, I know I'm good. And that's what he told reporters initially. However, Steven's opinion on this would change. And when he would be questioned by reporters a second time, he said that he might see a psychiatrist so that he could go and get to the bottom of what happened, and that he would also consider going under hypnosis to maybe try and recall some of the events that happened while he disappeared. Now, this would not be the last time that Steven would seemingly change his mind over the opinions on the events that took place. In that second interview with reporters, he seemed very determined to figure out what had happened and what had caused him to seemingly forget 14 months of his life. Later in June of 1979, when being interviewed by the Boston Globe, Steven then said that he kind of became desensitized to it all and that he really didn't have much of a desire to figure out what had happened anymore. Which seems a little bit odd. Why would you go from being dead set to figuring everything is weird and you need to get to the bottom of it, to just kind of being uninterested and saying, it is what it is? That just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Again, I have not had any point in my life where I've disappeared for an undisclosed amount of time and then reappeared, so I don't know what he's thinking in this instance. However, it is odd to think that, I want to get to the bottom of something and then say, nah, I'm good. It's just a little bit weird. Now, at this same time, Steven was planning on heading back to college, as he viewed this absentia degree he got from Hope College as a farce, and he wanted to get a more official degree. He didn't really recognize it because he didn't do all the work. So he wanted to get another degree that pretty much was him doing all the work, if that makes any sense. But he did not like this absentia degree, and this motivated him to go back to college. Now, fast forward to the present day real quick. Steven Kubacki is still alive and has actually made quite a name for himself. He ended up getting a PhD in clinical psychology, and according to his website, he has held multiple jobs, such as being a professor at the University of Wyoming, being the department chair of psychology at Bastyr University, as well as currently being in a private practice with psychology at the moment, as well as being a writer. Steven is clearly very intelligent, and clearly wouldn't need to make a story like this up in order to get some sort of fame or fortune from this event. Or at least, you would think so, on the surface. But before we dive into any theories or anything like that, we need to tie up some loose ends about this story, and kind of dig up those unknown things that I didn't initially mention in the story, but I'm going to mention them and I want to go over to them because they're going to play an impactful role in theories. So I want to get into those and I want to tie up these loose ends. Firstly, what I found was a possible sighting by a witness who said to have seen someone matching Steven's description on the night he vanished down by the edge of Lake Michigan. However, this person, aka this guy that looks like Steven, wasn't alone, but rather with a young girl, possibly around his age as well. The man, aka the guy who looks like Steven, was climbing on some ice that was blown up and refroze, and the witness cautioned the man that it was dangerous to do this, but the man replied to the witness that he was an experienced outdoorsman and knew what he was doing. The identity of the woman he was with remains unknown. Taking this and running with it, investigators asked around Hope College if anyone knew of Kubacki having a girlfriend, and they all replied with yes, but not locally. They said that he had numerous girlfriends that he had met abroad in Germany and France, but none in Michigan. The woman who was believed to be with the man the witness described as Kubacki was traced down and interviewed about that day. What was discussed remains unknown. However, she was enrolled at Hope College, and when police followed up to see if she was still enrolled in March, they said that she was, but had not attended class for some time at Hope College, as she was staying with an aunt in Grand Rapids. It is reported that this unidentified woman had become very distraught when the news of Steven's disappearance came out, and it was even speculated that she even contemplated taking her own life over it, seemingly implying that she had some type of relationship with Steven that was not public knowledge. However, this isn't the only loose end. A former classmate of Steven's from Hope College, Robert Neat, was not shocked to hear about Steven's disappearance, and let me tell you why. Neat describes Steven as being quite a political force in the classroom, with him getting into heated discussions in the classroom and even starting an underground newspaper at Hope College that was very anti-government and very anti-establishment. Now, what does this have to do with the disappearance? And I'm getting into that. Neat also says that a few weeks before Steven would go missing, a videotape circled around Hope College of Steven recounting his time in Germany and saying that he wants to go back to Europe and that he preferred Europe and Germany a lot more than the United States. This led Neat to the conclusion that Steven most likely fled to Germany and that he staged his whole disappearance. To pile onto this, during the initial investigation, this is also what Steven's brother John Jr. thinks his brother did. John felt like he had also flew to Germany, since he enjoyed it so much, and that he most likely flew out on Icelandic Air out of Chicago. Now, why did John Jr. assume this? I'm only assuming that he thought that this was the case because I don't know what flights to Germany were like in 1978, so I have to imagine that this was the closest stop to where you could get a flight to Germany at this time. But that I'm not fully sure. But I am providing that for you, that he thought that he flew to Germany as well. However, when flight logs were checked, there was no evidence of a Steven Kubacki ever even getting on a flight to Germany or even being in any flight logs to Germany. So that seemingly kind of eliminates that from the conversation of where was Steven Kubacki for those 14 months. Now, lastly, just a few more points before we get into theories. A man by the name of Ron Curtis actually picked up a hitchhiker that matched Steven's description when Steven awoke in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and Ron Curtis said that he had drove him to Great Barrington. However, this hitchhiker, again, aka Steven, or what we think is Steven, did not say his name was Steven, but rather that his name was Nathan, and that he had hitched a ride to San Francisco and had flown back into Boston and took a bus to Pittsfield. He said the bus fare was around $8, and that was confirmed. It was around $8. He told Ron Curtis to drive him to a friend's house, as he had news to tell her in regards to a mutual friend. Who he was referring to as his friend was his aunt. Now, why he would lie about this being his aunt remains a mystery, and why Steven would give some sort of alias also is very mysterious and very weird. What Nathan, aka Steven, also told Ron Curtis is that he had gone to San Francisco to learn from an Eastern religion cult that was operating in the Bay Area. Now, Steven said that he wasn't looking to join the cult, but rather learn from them. He kind of left this pretty vague. Ron didn't want to make accusations of Kubacki actually saying these things to him, so he continued and said that he kind of felt for Steven and that he was, quote-unquote, in between a rock and a hard place with having to justify his disappearance. Either way, this is a perplexing tidbit that makes this story a little bit more odd and makes you question if Steven was faking this whole thing. The Eastern religion cult is also interesting because you want to look at Steven's anti-government sentiment that he was very strongly with at school. I don't think that him going to San Francisco and kind of getting up with this Eastern religion cult would be out of the realm of possibility if he wanted to get involved with a group that might have shared similar interests that he did. Now, the last note I have is on the marathon. Now, he was wearing a marathon t-shirt when he woke up on the grassy knoll in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and this marathon t-shirt was from the Pavo Nurmi Marathon. That was the only marathon in Wisconsin during the time period Steven vanished, so it was pretty easy to find out which marathon it actually was from. However, there are no Steven Kubackis on the list of people who ran that marathon, and there was no Nathans either. So he must have used a different alias if he ran the race. This would make some sort of sense, as Steven told reporters that he felt like he had done a lot of running during his time when he was disappeared. Or maybe perhaps Steven acquired the shirt through different means, or like I said, he used a different alias of some sort. We have no idea. So the marathon kind of seems like a little bit of a dead end with us not knowing if he used an alias or where he got the shirt to begin with. We don't really know. But with those loose ends in the story wrapped up, let's do a deep dive into theories and figure out what possibly could be going on here with why Steven Kubacki seemingly vanished for 14 months and then magically reappeared. Now, our first theory is disappeared on his own accord. This theory is that Steven voluntarily disappeared. But if this was the case, why would he do something like that? Now, here are my thoughts on that matter. Now, it's clear that Steven's ideologies didn't fully mesh with the rest of his peers at Hope College, and maybe there was a small sense of him feeling like he didn't belong. After all, other classmates thought he was very weird, albeit extremely intelligent. He was vocal about him liking Germany more than America, and perhaps expressed some sort of a desire to return to Germany. However, we know that over the course of those 14 months Stephen was vanished. It's unlikely that he did travel to Germany, as we have no plane records that show that. Perhaps what Ron Curtis told reporters was true. Maybe Stephen did go to San Francisco and join up with an Eastern religion cult that better meshed with his ideologies. And then after, he got homesick and wanted to return home. Perhaps he knew his parents wouldn't approve of this, so he staged it to look like he went missing. Maybe he walked backwards in his tracks, so it looked like he walked out onto the ice and fell through. Who knows? But I do think this theory kind of fits the bill a little bit. Now, our second theory is portal. Now, this next theory is more out there, and it is one a lot of people talk about as also being a possibility. And I think if you're looking at this case just on the surface, without doing any real digging, I would see why this makes sense. Portals are also proposed as a theory for many missing 411 cases, as it seems that people disappear without a trace, and there's kind of nothing else to justify as to why they vanish, so they're like, oh, it must be proof that there are portals that we cannot explain. However, I guess it's fair to speculate that this could be something, and that this could be a theory. Of course, there is no evidence that supports the existence of portals, and there is no evidence to support that Stephen went through a portal of any kind. So in my opinion, I'm going to kind of keep this theory sidelined. Now, our third theory is head injury into fugue state. Now, I'm going to elaborate on what that means. Now, maybe this series of events that Stephen went on was caused by head injury. Now, if you're like, how would a head injury cause someone to completely lose track of where they are? I want to tell you the case of Danny Philippitis. Danny was a Toronto firefighter who was taking an annual ski trip to Whiteface Mountain in Lake Placid, New York. Danny told his friends that he had forgotten his cell phone in his car that he was going to use to take pictures. Now, what would transpire is that Danny wouldn't be seen again, and this started a manhunt for Danny. 6 days later, Danny would seemingly come to, however, not in Lake Placid, but rather in Sacramento, California. It turns out Danny had taken a wrong turn on his way to his car and fell and suffered some type of head injury. This head injury most likely caused him to mistake the Children's Center for the main lodge, and this caused him to get further disoriented and kind of turned around. Danny remembers very little about the days after going to the ski area, but what Danny does remember in little tidbits is that he thinks that he most likely flagged down a trucker for a ride off the mountain. Then he remembers him being sick at a rest stop, and then him slightly coming to and realizing he was driving through Utah. Now, when Danny fully came around from this kind of head injury, this mysterious truck driver who was driving him stopped in Sacramento and told him that this was the end of the line. With no phone and no way to get in touch with his wife, Danny kind of wandered the city trying to figure out how to get in touch with his wife. He was able to buy an iPhone with his credit card after trying a few times at different stores with no luck because he didn't have an ID with him. Eventually he did have luck and was able to get a cell phone. He then at that point doesn't remember his wife's phone number, so he doesn't even know still how to get in touch with her. And then what he recounts to investigators and police and doctors is that he vaguely remembers going on the internet at one point and then realizing that he was a missing person. Now, the following day in Sacramento, he's kind of come around a little bit more. He hitched a ride to the airport, and he suddenly remembers his wife's phone number, to which he calls her, and gets arranged to go back home to Toronto. Now, once home, Danny was put into a hospital for evaluation, where doctors were able to piece together some of this story, and kind of a lot of what I just related to you. Now, what they came to the conclusion of is that he most likely suffered a concussion, and this caused amnesia, also known as a fugue state. Now, Dissociative fugues are rare, but they do happen, and do cause people to end up in unfamiliar locations with no recollection of how they even got there. Now, this is very interesting, and this kind of throws another wrench into the idea of what possibly could have happened to Steven Kubacki. Could this have been what happened to Steven? Now, on a separate note, a newspaper reporter for a Mississippi newspaper reported that this was the cause of Steven's disappearance, and that Steven had fell on the ice and was in the hospital and was recovering, and the hospital neglected to tell the police. Now, I don't know how accurate this news report is, because this wouldn't explain the rest of the time he was seemingly disappeared, and there's a lot of holes in that, but I did want to kind of provide it as a little bullet point that a newspaper thought that this did happen as well. Now, fugue state is a good theory. However, 14 months is a long friggin' time to be in a fugue state, as they usually last for a few days to a few months, but 14 months seems like an extra long time. Now, our last theory is paranormal forces. Now, this last theory is that maybe Steven's disappearance had something to do with the Lake Michigan Triangle. Like other triangles around the world, Lake Michigan has a triangle that contains a large number of shipwrecks, plane crashes, and unexplained disappearances. Although this area has seen its fair share of mystery and unanswered questions, perhaps we will save the story of the Lake Michigan Triangle for a future episode. But on the flip side of that, I still find it very hard-pressed that Steven would be under some type of paranormal force. If Steven was never found, maybe this theory would have more traction. But with Steven resurfacing and Steven's frequent trips to the lake, it kind of surprises me that he didn't have any previous runs with anything of the paranormal variety, but who knows? Again, much like the portals theory, there isn't much evidence to support this theory rather than just speculation and coincidence. Now that kind of brings me into my own personal thoughts and theories. Now, my personal theory is that I think that this is either some sort of fugue state or Steven flat out made it up. My theory is kind of like a two-parter because I'm really split. And for the fugue state part of this, I kind of believe that he wouldn't just knowingly run off without telling someone, but for 14 months just seems like an awful long time. I just don't know. On the other side of it, I think that there's a strong likelihood that Steven ran off and got homesick and generated a story of him not remembering where he was. He was clearly highly intelligent, but was also very outspoken about his views. It would make sense that he would want to go somewhere where he was more accepted, like perhaps San Francisco. However, Steven still stands by the story, and even though some bits and pieces he doesn't fully admit, or he leaves it pretty vague, I think Steven, to an extent, knew what he was doing. But with the lack of information that is out there, it's very hard to tell. And from start to finish, this story is very odd. And a lot of things are going to remain unanswered until perhaps Steven comes forward more about the event and maybe even confesses that it was a hoax, or maybe he continues to stand by it. I don't think one theory for certain fits here, and this is a case that I really don't know what happened, and unfortunately, we might not ever know. Now, Steven, as he's gotten older in age, has been more outspoken about the event, as he has talked to more people about it. However, I think he might be writing a book, or if he has wrote a book. I couldn't find that he wrote a book, but I heard and saw multiple sources that says he was writing a book about the whole experience. So maybe in that book, when it eventually does come out, he will expose more of the facts that what he can remember about this incident entirely. However, even though I provide that with my own theory, I truly don't know what happened. Because I think maybe it could have started as a fugue state or something like that, and then he kind of made up the rest as he went, or who knows. This entire story is perplexing from start to finish, and I truly don't know what to think, and there's not a single theory that I really, really like, because I don't think any of the theories answer all the questions that we have. But with that being said, that is going to conclude this week's episode on the disappearance and reappearance of Steven Kubacki. Now, this episode was a very interesting one to research, as I mentioned in the open, that there's not a lot of information out there, and I hope that more people get exposed to the story and they learn more about it, and hopefully more information comes with that. But it's also a very old story, so maybe we'll get that information, or maybe we won't. But it motivated me, the mysterious of it and kind of the lack of information out there, kind of motivated me to do it for this week's episode. But with that being said, since it is the end of the episode, I'm going to do my mandatory plugs that I do at the end of every episode. If you are listening to this on YouTube, please like, comment, subscribe. It helps me out with the algorithm. I greatly appreciate it. If you are listening to this on Spotify, please turn on post notifications so you get notified every time I post a new episode. I greatly appreciate it. I am also on Instagram. You can follow me at Unblurring the Unknown on Instagram. I will be posting the custom cover art from this episode, and any pictures that I find that were somewhat relevant to this week's episode will be out on there as well. With that being said, you can also send me topic suggestions. This topic wasn't a suggestion, but there was last week's episode, Mel's Hole, was a topic suggestion. I do them. So please give me topic suggestions. You can send them to my Instagram. You can send them to my email. That is unblurringtheunknown@gmail.com. You can send them right there, and I will throw them into my episode queue for later research. But with that being said, that is going to conclude this week's episode on Steven Kubacki, and I greatly appreciate all the support and really just kind words I've been getting over the past few weeks. Again, it seems like I keep having more and more people come up to me in person and say how much they enjoy the content, and I can't say enough how much that means to me. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. But as I'm recording this, the eclipse happened earlier today. I hope that you all had a fantastic solar eclipse day. If you were in the path of totality, I hope you enjoyed it. I thought it was really cool. Don't fully understand people driving 4, 5, 6 hours to come and see it, but that is not the point. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you had a fantastic solar eclipse day, like I said, and we're all still alive, so that's good, and that debunks all those conspiracy theories. But with that being said, that is going to close out this week's episode. I hope you greatly enjoy it, and I will see you all on the next one.